Hey guys, welcome back to another podcast. Woo, these are awesome. Smashing these out. And I'm loving that all you guys listen to the podcast every single day. That's right. We release an episode every single day. So if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't already hit subscribe, make sure you're subscribing here on YouTube and on your podcast app, be it, Spotify or Apple or whatever, because I can see you listening, but you ain't subscribing. Guys, what's going on? Welcome back. My name is Dan and I have autism, ADHD, OCD, and dyslexia. And I'm joined today by an awesome guest. This is Dr. Angela Lauria. Hopefully I said that right. Who is a co-host, co-host of the Autistic Culture podcast, who is also a late diagnosed autistic person herself. And your special interest is non-fiction to help almost 2,000 entrepreneurs write, publish, and promote their books, right? Which is really interesting. We'll get into that in a minute. So, Doc, tell us, what's your PhD in? I want to know.
It's in communications, actually, and specifically because I'm autistic, I focused on social justice and social change. So I wrote a dissertation that was about how we create more social change through live performance. So music and theater and how that can shift people's minds more than recorded things. Although now I record a podcast for a living, so I'm not sure what that means.
Well, that's outlet, isn't it? But that's interesting. I have a diploma in performing arts and I have a national diploma in music technology and performance. So yeah, really cool. I'm really into that. And also, I've just released a membership course called Chaos to Confidence. It's all about communication, right? With a massive part of it about communication. I love that. So let's get into that. How did you get started with kind of like creating content, making books and stuff like that? Like, how did you get into it?
Yeah, well, theater was one of my first special interests. So I was doing shows from the time I was really young, and then I was writing books. So I wrote my first book when I was 7 and paid my way through university writing people's term papers. So I used to charge $10 a page and did people's homework for them, which was a good way to get through college and pay my bills. And then I started as a ghostwriter when I was 20.
Okay.
And so creating content has been really easy for me. Having relationships with people has been harder. So my relationships with books have always gone very well. I don't know. I know some people will be watching this on video because I follow you on YouTube. So behind me is my museum of books that I've published. I love helping other people get their books done. And then I also write my own books. And podcasting is something that I've been doing to help people write books. But the Autistic Culture podcast started a little over a year ago. I think there's so much great content out there from autistic advocates that is like, why do things happen this way? Or why do we have communication challenges? But our podcast really focuses on the positive aspects of what an autistic culture is. So we're not trying to fix any problems, like other people can fix problems or explain problems. We're really trying to celebrate autistic accomplishments and autistic
100%.
joy.
I love that. I love how you're focusing on the good stuff, because there's so much not really focusing on the bad stuff, but focusing on things that don't really matter. I mean, I've been in heated discussions about the term Asperger's and Aspie and high function, low function, and I kind of just get bogged down with it. I'm like, guys, this isn't helping the movement. Like, this isn't helping, the stuff that's really needing to happen. And I think promoting positive attitudes within the community is a really interesting thing that needs to happen, and just move away from.
I want to take that to the next level too. This might be controversial, but
nothing's controversial.
I think if you are getting a diagnosis because you need accommodations in work or school or disability payments or something like that, an official diagnosis is great. But what I think we should be moving towards is just identifying neurodivergent cultures and being able to recognize that. So I don't need to diagnose someone as Irish, right? If I see someone playing a boron, even if it's, I don't know, an African guy playing a boron, I could be like, oh, a boron, that's part of Irish culture. Or if I see someone eating a cannoli, I can say, oh, that's part of Italian culture.
Yeah.
And so my goal is to have everyone, all people, it's a neurodiverse world, be able to recognize autistic culture as well as they could recognize Irish culture or Italian culture or Nigerian culture.
100%. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that autistic individuals, the internet has given us this ability to come out of our shells and and congregate on a place, giving us our third space, right? And I think that has developed its own culture. You know what I mean? Like our fidget gadgets and our books and all those kind of things. Yeah, exactly, right.
I'm fidget gadgeting right here.
But like it's given us something completely different, and I think that's interesting because everything has its culture, right? Everything has a culture, and culture stem from somewhere. But what I think we do need to try to carefully with is dismissing the profound issues that many autistic individuals face, rather than just being it's culture based. Well, it's not culture based, it's support based or it's help based, and I think like there's a fine line that we need to kind of walk down here, and this is why I think that like labeling everything as ASD in the DSM was a smart move to get everybody the accessible support. But I think it was a very experimental move in terms of how we understand the layers and levels of people who are affected. You know what I mean? So like,
yeah. Unintended consequences for sure. Like no one was trying to do that, but
no.
I mean, the question that I would ask is, are there things like support needs that need to be addressed that are separate from the conversation about autistic culture and about neurotypes? Because to me, it's both and, right? Like,
yes, it is. Yeah,
I'm Italian American. There are many Italian Americans that have lots of different support needs of all neurotypes, and all of those should be addressed. But our humanity as autistic people is thrown into question by having the DSM at all, like pathologizing the neurotype. Like we don't pathologize other aspects, to me, of people's biology in the way, and we certainly did like with queerness. That was in the DSM at one point, and we're like, oh wait, like people that are queer have different support needs, if and depending on where you live and like what your other medical conditions are, and having an autistic neurotype makes you predisposed to many things, lupus, Ehlers-Danlos, like so many medical.
Yeah, loads of things.
But they have diagnoses, like they have medical codes. They should be addressed.
I think, but I think like you're right in the terms of things like, I mean, you can't just say that someone's homosexual, they have something wrong with them, like that's ridiculous. Why on earth would the DSM even try and treat somebody who's homosexual? So I just deal with it, right? People who are gay, like, well, whatever.
Right.
My brother's gay. I love gay people. The gay scene's great. Like whatever. But in terms of autism, if you go back to like the Lorna Wink type of stuff, and they talk about the triad of impairment, right? And I think we fundamentally need to not take away from the fact that it is a disability and it has many factions. So my areas of difficulty in things like navigation and instruction in real time, understanding, alexithymia, understanding conversation with people I don't really know that well when I'm not prepared for that conversation, and things like that, and they're really big struggles. Yeah, my friend Asa, his daughter Abby, she has a hard time going to the bathroom on her own. She can't actually verbalize herself through speech, and she's on the spectrum. So we're both on the spectrum, and the DSM would say we both have the same diagnosis, which is technically untrue. And I know what you're saying, that like, yes, and so it's, yes, you have the same diagnosis, but then you also have these other things like, executive function disorder, maybe she's got global learning delay. There's maybe a bunch of other things that come into it, right? But fundamentally, what binds us together is this kind of triad of impairment of communication, social understanding, and I forgot what the other one was. I think it's like social imagination or something. Whatever the triad of impairment is, and I think we need to still keep close to that core of it, because I think initially that's why they put the levels in it, right? You got level 1, level 2, level 3 autistic, right? Which it kind of explains the idea. But then again, there's loads. You got the IDC, I think, is the other one, right? The other kind of diagnostic kind of way to do it. You got the DISCO, you got the ADOS, there's a bunch of different ways, right? That you can go through the whole thing, and everyone goes through them all when you do a diagnosis.
Right.
I think we should. I think to me, the way I see it is like, it's yes and, right? Like it's having those things, like, yes, it's autism level 1 or whatever, but also adding in there's cultural aspect to it. We should identify the fact that there's culture within that, and that the culture isn't the disability, it's the things that are impacting your life.
Correct.
Which is a disability.
That's the point. That's exactly the point. And when we merge those things, we miss so much that when we celebrated about our culture, that we can, yeah, it gets lost. Like there are things that we can leverage. One of my favorite stories, I know you're into music and so am I. One of my favorite stories is the story of Questlove. So I don't know, do you know who Questlove is? Aspie?
No, I did not know this.
Okay. So he and obviously we know it's highly heritable, and so probably his parents are too. But here's what happens. He's growing up, his parents are musicians.
Right.
And all the time, Questlove wants to spin, like spinning in circles, proprioception, right?
Yeah.
And so his dad, when he's like 2 years old, gives him a turntable and a bunch of his old Motown records. And he's like, spin these, kid. Right now, Questlove, if you don't know who he is one of the world's best DJs. He's an amazing musician, an incredible drummer. And he is also the world's best historian of African-American music, because when he was little, he was also hyperlexic. And so he was reading and memorizing all the labels on the records he was spinning. So his stim of spinning became his special interest. And now he has the world's biggest museum. It's actually already been pre-donated to the Smithsonian when he dies. So he has this incredible legacy. And this came from not pathologizing or levelizing his spinning, trying to get him to stop spinning or saying, hey, you get a cookie if you don't spin. Instead, his dad was like, here are some records that you can beat up and scratch to hell. And you know, that sort of acceptance of the culture in their family came easy, but it's not easy in the culture because we see that behavior and we're like, we must fix it.
Exactly. I think you're so right. And I think this is where the issue between kind of like where ABA becomes really sketchy, right? Mm-hmm. So the applied behavioral analysis, when it first started, I think it was Eric Logos, right, who started this year, or what, he was one of the kind of like first people who started doing this stuff, right? And what they were trying to do is similar to how kind of like Leo Kanner was thinking about autism, right? He was like, it's got to be the mothers. Some mothers didn't love their kids. Now it's a refrigerator mother.
Refrigerator mother.
You know, like, it's like, no, dude, because their intelligence of the subject was completely minimal because they had less access to communicating and networking, right? Which is understandable. I don't hold them to account for it because they didn't know. Because, you know, you go back to like 1920, everyone was slapping their wives. That's not a good thing, but it happened because it was a sign of the time, right? Same with Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger. Those people were doing crazy, awful things because they didn't really know much else. And it's really, I'm not kind of giving them a get out of jail free card. I'm just saying this is how culture exists, right? And then when you look at like ABA therapy, they were, I think it was like in the maybe 2010 to 2013, they were like, oh, this is really weird, like sketchy stuff. Like maybe we should pivot away from the stuff that's a bit kind of like cruel and use things that work. And so you're absolutely right. Somebody's stimming, you wouldn't implement a behavioral kind of therapy on that stim because, well, it's not hurting anyone. But my friend Asa, when his daughter Abby wants to go to the toilet, like she couldn't go to the toilet on her own, but she used ABA therapy to be able to go to the toilet, right? So ABA has improved her condition of life, which is quite fascinating. So it depends what you're trying to like pathologize. If you're pathologizing something that would improve a condition of somebody's life to urge them towards an existence, then do that. But if it's just doing it because you want them to be normal, then it's different. You know, because Abby loves her independence of using the bathroom on her own. You know, so that's a good thing. But she wouldn't like if you took her stim away. You know what I mean? So like you said, don't. And I think we really need to kind of just black and white this, because a lot of people say ABA is the most harmful thing in the world. I'm like, well, it isn't. It used to be. It has certain prospects of it that are just terrible, that are just conditioning, like, you know, Pavlov's dogs. But then the other side of it is that you go, well, actually, you can actually create behaviors in people to help improve their life and condition, which make them more independent, you know, because you got to think like, you know, and I know, and I share that fear, you know, if you're a parent, you share fear, what's going to happen to my kids when I die, especially if they have profound disabilities. And if you can find a way to encourage them to become more independent or create a habit or a behavior to become more independent, I think there's nothing wrong with that. As long as it doesn't encroach on human rights violations, you know, as long as you're not like whipping somebody to wipe their butt or something, you know, like it's not ridiculous. Like
tasing them, which is what they do.
They used to, of course they did. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, you're looking at Eric Lobas and, you know, and all these people were just doing kind of like more barbaric things, but we'd break a person down and then recondition them to understand what they're saying. So they could repeat the command, repeat the command.
I think, like, here, if we go from the like fundamental understanding of this is a neurotype, like you can't change my eye color, you can't change if I'm gay.
Phenotype is what it is, right? Yeah.
Right. So the people who did ABA founded ABA also founded gay conversion therapy. Yeah. Very ineffective, like very low. You're not going to make my brown eyes blue. You're not going to make me straight if I'm gay. And
again, so low intelligence.
My neurotype. Right.
Yeah, they didn't understand. Yeah.
And so if you can change that underlying philosophy and accept autistic and neurodivergent people for who we are, and then say, what support needs do you have that I can help with? What are all the tools? And it's not a system. It's individual to the person and it's individual to the circumstance. That's the problem with the levels. Like, I'm categorized as level 1, right? Asperger. I was diagnosed Asperger's. Now it's ASD level.
ASD level, yeah.
However, I went through very bad period of autistic burnout where I could not leave my closet and I just laid on the floor of my closet and couldn't speak for 3 months. And that is not level 1, right? If I was diagnosed that day, would I be diagnosed as level 2? Like,
exactly.
So it changes. You're not just like at a level. There are different times, there are different incidents in your life. And that's why I think we should see people as people. So if that broad umbrella is that this is a culture, a neurotype, a physical characteristic that is not going to change, that doesn't require a pill or a diet or, I don't know, colloidal mercury, silver, or whatever they're trying
to,
whatever little snake oil they want to give me, that's not going to change who I am fundamentally. And that's why I support, identity first language so much. So
what's that? What is, sorry, identity first language? Can you just reiterate what that means?
Calling myself autistic rather than saying I have autism. So like if I had a cancer diagnosis or if I had a wart, I would say I have a wart or I have cancer. But I don't have autism. I am autistic. Right? Like that's just, I don't disavow that as some separate part of me that needs to be fixed. It's just, I'm also 5'4". Like it is just a fact of my being.
But would you say that like it's wrong to, because I use it to, I don't really care. Like if somebody says that they are autistic or they have autism, I don't really care because to me, like it doesn't make any difference. You are who you are. Regardless if you said it in Chinese, Russian, British, I don't care. Like,
for sure.
Doesn't make a difference.
So
you are who you are, right?
That's why I said that's why I use identity first language, because it's important to me.
So who you are, but, as more of your ethics, right? Your personal kind of ethics, right?
Yeah, but I think people should do. I think people should do whatever the hell they want.
Comfortable with, 100%. Yeah. And I said this the other day. Like I was talking to it. People were saying like, oh, because people this whole Hans Asperger thing. Like, could I say? Sometimes I'll say, yeah, I was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome. Like, I don't use that term that much anymore. Not because I don't want to, just because I feel like, people understand what term ASD now or autism spectrum disorder. I think they understand that a lot more now. But before they'd understand, oh, Asperger's, oh, well, that means you kind of like you have less support needs and all those things. They used to get it a bit more, but now they get it with ASD. And one of the things I always say, and people say, oh, Hans Asperger's Nazi. Yeah, maybe he did some, or he did do some shady things. Hans Asperger, facilitated, Nazi support regimes. He was never really an officially Nazi party member. But the reason that they called it Asperger syndrome was a lot of the research that he did, which was valuable research. Like, so, yes, 50% of the stuff was atrociously eugenic and kind of like, euthanizing kids, which is awful, right? The guy needs to go to hell. But the rest of the stuff, there still came out some really interesting stuff. Like, let's put it this way. In Germany right now, people still use the Autobahn. It was built by Hitler. People still use VW cars because the conception of the idea between Porsche and Hitler was this idea of the people's car, right? And when I was saying everything they did was valid, I'm not saying everything they did was awful. I was saying that some parts have to remain because it's just part of it. And kind of like Hans Asperger's name, when Lorna Wing said, hey, look, some of the research that Hans Asperger did is valid in this point because he's looking at psychoanalysis, and then we can apply that to this diagnosis of ASD level 1, right? We say Asperger syndrome, which is where the term was coined. It wasn't coined because they wanted to celebrate him. Nothing to do with the fact. But then all the kind of the news came out that he may or may not have been heavily involved in Nazis. We don't actually know a lot of the factual information
Right.
because it's a bit sketchy. 1942, right? But this is interesting. This is the point I was going to get to.
Yeah.
I allow people to want to be called they, she, them, Z. I don't really care. Whatever you want to identify with, cool with me. So why should it be any different for autistic people? Why are autistic people bullying people for using the term Asperger's, right? When I have to call somebody them and Z, we'll just say, okay, you can call yourself Asperger's. Nobody cares.
Right. I would agree with that. I mean, respect people in general.
And,
like, it just seems...
And this was funny.
Somebody, humanity.
Yeah, and somebody tried to pull out this whole like racist card thing, saying, oh, you wouldn't know if you weren't a Romani descent or Jewish descent, right? And I said, well, that's funny because I am Romani descent. My father and grandmother are Romani, right? So, and I use them Asperger's. I get offended by it. You know what I mean? So, like, people don't know my heritage. People think I'm just this pasty white guy, but I'm not. I have a mixed heritage. My family from the Balkans and Romani kind of like, that area. So,
yeah.
So people don't know that. Just because I look white doesn't mean I'm Caucasian. You know what I mean? They don't know my heritage. So it's really interesting. But yeah, you're absolutely right about the whole identifying. Like, we are accepting now because we should be accepting because we're just people doing stuff for people, right?
I think that's totally true. And the other thing I always like, knowing me, I can sort of only speak for me, is like, if I were in Hans Asperger's position, I would have spoken out and I would have been killed.
100%. Yeah, the guns who said the whole time.
Before any of the research was done. So, I mean, I guess being killed would be better. I mean,
I would have said, I personally, but that's your personal choice though, right?
Right. I mean, I don't know. It's like he did save, I know a lot of people died because of him, but he also saved some people that maybe wouldn't have been saved. And like, it's so hard to judge. I
mean, it's a different time.
It's all the time. Yeah.
It's to judge it.
Yeah. Being American right now at a time where there is a lot going on in America, and I feel like there are places where I've taken a stand, including moving to England, where I was like, I cannot participate in this system. So maybe Hans Asperger's could have, I don't know, moved to Argentina or something. But like, everyone has to make their own decision. Not everyone who feels the way I do can move out of America. Not everybody can quit their job. And so it's sort of a place of privilege to look back and say, well, he was a Nazi and let's like not use his name, because what were the available options?
Yeah, what were
even not do the work, get killed and not do the work, call Hitler and change his mind.
But it's funny. It's funny. I'm going to wrap this up soon, guys. I'm sorry we're going on a bit of a Hans Asperger thing here, but I think it's super important right now. But I'm actually doing a long form factual info video all about this because I'm going through the stuff that Baron Karen and Silverman did, that paper they published, because I want to go through that. And there was another book about Hans Asperger's Industry of Death, or what it was called, and there's a bunch of different things. I'm going to go through all of that because I think people are getting half-cocked information. But I'm also going to cover things like Hugo Boss, Fanta, Siemens Electronics. They built the gas chambers. We still use Siemens Electronics phones. Hugo Boss made the Third Reich uniforms. We still use Hugo Boss. There's a whole sketchy past because Fanta, people don't know this, but Fanta was created in Nazi Germany for the Nazi Party because they didn't have access to the other ingredients because of the sanctions put on Germany, right, from the Western governments. So they had to make orange juice, basically. Anyway, so we still use Fanta, but nobody has a big stink about it because it was a thing in the past that was like, it doesn't
also
mean
because it's
racist.
Delicious.
Yeah, and it's nice. Like, but it doesn't mean that because you drink, or drive a Volkswagen, or you drive on the Autobahn, which was used to transport people to kill. This is horrendous, right? But we still use the Autobahn in Germany because it's there. It's a part of history. It's part of what happened.
Oh wait, so I have a question for you. Are people like calling you a Nazi for not changing?
Not calling me a Nazi, but they're calling me out, saying you need to change the name. You shouldn't use it. Telling me what to do with the term, and I think, like, guys, come on, like, first of all, the term Aspie is a cutesy version from Asperger's. It doesn't actually say Asperger's. Aspie is a completely different term, right? It could mean anything.
Right.
The AspieWorld is something I created years ago, and anyway, my company's called Tau Media. That's my company. We just call the AspieWorld YouTube channel, right? So people call me out, dude. You go on TikTok, you go on Instagram, and you type in, Hans Asperger AspieWorld, you'll find there's threads and threads on it. And I think there's so many people. I don't know. People are bogged down with it. and they're worried about it, and they talk about it, and it's like, okay, we can have your own opinion on it, but at the end of the day, dude, like, it doesn't really matter. What matters to me in the World is I'm like, okay, there's like millions of people who are autistic who haven't got access to accessibility technology. I want to change that. There's millions of autistic individuals who are undiagnosed who need access to support. I'm going to change that.
Millions and millions.
52 million people in America can't go see a doctor because they've got healthcare insurance, right?
Oh,
that's
believe me.
So
I can tell you all about
that. I'm trying, like, those things are the things that keep me up at night. I don't sit there awake like, oh, I used the term Asperger's today. Somebody's going to cry. Nobody cares. Like, that doesn't matter to me because it doesn't make a change. Somebody says the term Asperger's or neurodivergent, nothing changes. But when you give an autistic person who is non-speaking, who has struggling in communication, a tablet with an accessibility app on it, that could change their life. Then, so that's the difference I'm trying to make. Anyway, I could ramble on for ages. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to run. I have to go. I have another meeting to get into. This has been amazing. Angela, where can people find more about you? Like, how do we get in? People want to find you. Yeah. What links am I putting in the show notes?
We've got a podcast and a newsletter at autisticculturepodcast.com. There's a Substack over there and a whole treasure trove. So if you want to know more about Questlove or Eminem or Steve Jobs or Dino Nuggets, we've got a lot of autistic culture resources so you can celebrate our neurotype.
Dude, that's awesome. I love that. And yeah, it's Steve Jobs, poor guy. Okay. I will leave all the links, anything to do with Angela's kind of organization and her work. I'm going to get her to send me over an email with all the cool stuff, and I'll leave them in the description of this video and in the show notes of this podcast. Guys, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today, Angela.
Thank you.